Hello, I'm Eric Smith, and this is the Low Budget Review Show. Alright, today I want to talk about The Blasted Lands by James A. Moore, which is a sequel to Seven Forges. So before I get started on this book, just a little refresher for those of you who read Seven Forges. Might be like me and can't remember all the details. I did review Seven Forges before, and if anybody wants to see that video, I'll put a link for it in the description down below. But for now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And there will be spoilers, so I'm going to use my spoiler system here. I have spoilers and end spoilers, so if you don't want to hear what I have to say about the first book, mute your volume once I put up the spoiler sign, and then you can turn the volume back up when I put up the end spoiler sign. That's how things work here at the Low Budget Review Show. So, spoilers. Here we go. So, Seven Forges, really quickly. Meros Dolver and his group traveled across the Blasted Lands to the Seven Forges and meet the Sabbat Talor. I don't know how you say it. A group of people that Meros and the people of the Empire of Faline have never heard of before. So Meros and his group go with the Sabbat Talor to the Seven Forges for a short time. Then they return to Faline with a few representatives of the Sabbat Talor, and while that's going on, you've got this character Andover Lashk, who is a blacksmith, and his hands are destroyed by the city guard, and the Sabbat Talor give him iron hands, and so he's required to go back to the Seven Forges and thank the gods there for the gift of new hands. And the Emperor of Faline is assassinated, so the army sends a contingent out after the Sabbat Talor, who are going back to the Seven Forges, and Sabbat Talor wipe out that contingent of soldiers, and the island state of Guntha is destroyed. And I think those are the big notes. Just all this stuff going on. We're introduced to all these new characters, of course, because it's the first book. Introduced to this new race, the Sabbat Talor, and things don't go well. And I think that kind of covers all the basics really quickly. So that's the end of the spoilers, at least the major spoilers. You can turn your sound back on now, although if you haven't yet, you wouldn't have heard me say that. Anyway, so that's kind of how things were left. When we get to the Blasted Lands, the sequel to Seven Forges, I can describe this book in 5 words. An empire prepares for war. I think that's 5. So an empire prepares for war. That's the main gist of what's going on here. Now it does say at the top here, war has come. I would have said war is coming, but that's me. I don't work for Angry Robot, which I didn't mention is the publisher of this book, Angry Robot. So the sequel to Seven Forges picks up right where the first book left off. Now, when you get old and frail like me, you may tend to forget things. So at first, it took me a little bit of time to get back into this, remember who the characters were. Remembered most of them, but the very first character in the book is Andover, however you say it, Lashk. and I had to remember who he was. I was like, all right, well, who is this guy? Oh, now I remember. Oh, yeah, this guy. So, but that's just me. So what we've got going on in this book, as I said, the Empire is preparing for, after the events of the last book, Maros Dulver is in charge of the army of Feline, or however you say it. One of the things with fantasy books is I never know how you're supposed to pronounce anybody's name, or the names of kingdoms, or anything else. So Maros is the head of the army, and he's trying to whip them into shape because they know that war is coming. Desh Crowhan, the wizard, sends his apprentices, I suppose you'd call them, the sisters, sends them off on different missions. They all have something that they've got to do. Andver Lashk is on his way to the Seven Forges to thank the gods of the Sabbat Talor for his iron hands. There's all sorts of interesting things going on with him. Excuse me. We get to meet some new characters. As I said, the sisters have gone off on different missions, so we're sort of introduced to new areas of the Empire and the different peoples there. And as always, don't want to go into too much detail. And all, excuse me. Also, as always, James A. Moore does a great job. It's another fantastic book. Easily as good as the first book, Seven Forges. And saying an empire prepares for war covers the basics of the story. I'm not sure that does it justice. That could be sound a little dull, but no, there's plenty of action, plenty of fighting, plenty of monsters, plenty of things going on, and lots of intrigue. A lot of political intrigue with some of the people. As I said, some new characters introduced. One in particular that I'm interested in. Doesn't get a lot of screen time, page time, but definitely an intriguing character, and I'm assuming is going to be a much more major character in the next book. I do like, no major spoilers here, there's a character in the first book named Brawley, who is a spoiled brat, and some things happen in the first book, and I suppose I could say minor spoiler, he gets his comeuppance in the first book. And with a character like that, I think an author could go any number of ways. You could have Brawley just wallow in self-pity. You could have him become even more of a whiny, spoiled little brat. You could have him learn the error of his ways. I'm sure there are other things that could happen to the character, but I think those are the three major kind of things you could do. And I really like the choice that James A. Moore made, and I'm hoping to see that character develop. He's a very minor character, but I like to see these character arcs, and I think he could have a very interesting arc, and I would love to see it go a certain direction. Whether or not that happens, just like you, I have to wait for the next book to find out. But that was one thing that kind of jumped out at me was, again, a character that I didn't even remember from the first book. If someone had, before I read this, if someone had asked me to describe the Seven Forges, I think I could have done a decent job of hitting the beats. But Brawley's a character that never would have come up. I never would have thought to mention him. And now I think he has the potential to be an outstanding character, which is nice. And I'm trying to not tell you which way he goes. Plenty of really good characters in here. And when I say really good characters, I don't mean good in the sense of they're good people. I mean good as in fascinating characters. Because you can have a character that's just a rat bastard, and you can't wait for them to die or, get what's coming to them. But they're still a good character, as in a well-written, fascinating character. And there are a few of those in here. As I said, the one new character that really stands out, just a small part, but maybe kind of an archetype that I've seen before, but it always seems to be an interesting character. I don't want to spoil it. See, I don't even know if saying the character's name is going to spoil it for people. Obviously, and if you've ever seen any of my other videos, I have a problem with, or concern with, spoilers. One of my sisters has yelled at me numerous times for spoilers for the simplest little things. So I never know how people are going to react to certain things. My sister's boyfriend and I were talking about Doctor Who, which my sister had just started watching, and all we did was mention the name Amy Pond. That's it. Just, we're talking about Doctor Who, and I said, wow, I really love Amy Pond. Very attractive woman, great character. That's all it was said, and my sister flipped out and started yelling at us about spoilers because she said, now that we actually mentioned somebody's name, she knew they were going to be a major character in the story, and she was like, as soon as they introduced the character, I knew she was the new companion. That just spoiled everything. Anyway, so some people react that way when you say the tiniest thing. So it's sometimes I'm concerned that the tiniest thing I mention is going to bother somebody. I know it can't be avoided, but I try to avoid, I'm not going to. Obviously, there are major spoilers, which I can avoid, but it's those tiny things you never know if someone's going to say, well, you spoiled it by saying so-and-so. I would never tell you that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. That's just crazy. That's going to ruin the movie for you. Although, if you haven't seen that movie by now, yeah. And Bruce Willis has been dead the whole time. But anyway, I'm getting a little off track because I'm trying to avoid. I love the covers for these books. Very good fantasy type covers. See, no, I'm going to say something. Here's a test. And maybe hopefully I'll get some comments below. People can tell me if you consider this a spoiler or not. In the Seven Forges, when we meet the Sabaa Talor, or however you say their name, they wear veils. And actually you can kind of see he's got a veil over his face. So they always wear these veils. The people of Faline never see them without their veils. Well, in this book, we learn why. We learn what's underneath those veils. So there's something to look forward to for those of you who haven't read the book yet. So I guess my question is that a spoiler? I'm not telling you what's under the veils, but I am telling you you're going to find out. Some people would consider that a spoiler. Alright, I think I've said spoiler plenty of times in this video. So anyway, it's a great sequel to Seven Forges. I'm absolutely looking forward to the next book. Just like in the last one, this has a cliffhanger ending. some questions from the first book are resolved in this book, but plenty more questions come up. We learn a lot more about, as I said, the kingdom of, or the empire of Feline. It's sort of expanded for us. If you were to draw a map based on what we learned in the first book, you could add plenty to it from what we learn in here. Your map would get bigger. We learn more about the gods of the Sabbat Talor through the character of Andover Lashk. As I said, he goes to the Seven Forges to thank them for his new iron hands. We learn more about that whole race, for lack of a better term. I suppose are they really a different race? I don't know. But through Andover Lashk and his visit to the Seven Forges and the Sabbat Talor, we learn much more about those people, how they live, how they interact with their gods. They're very, their gods are very hands-on. Excuse me. So we learn a lot more about them, and there were some things mentioned in the first book that we learn more about in this book. Again, concerns for the... No, I don't want to show the sign because then people will turn their volume off. Concern for spoilers here. So I don't want to say too much about that. About what was brought up in the first book that we learn about in this one. But Mr. Moore is a fantastic writer. This is the third book by him that I've reviewed, and I think that's the most for one author so far. Which just shows you I just love reading his stuff. In one of my earlier reviews, maybe it was just the last one or the one before that, I talk about how I like to have some sort of books on standby by an author, and fortunately I still have one, two, I'm looking over at the bookshelf, 3, down to 3, I think. That's all I have. 3 James A. Moore books I haven't read yet. A couple of them are rather old, oldish. But at least I've got those in stock, so when I'm in the mood. And then hopefully, well, I know he has at least one that came out recently that I need to pick up. And from what I've heard, he's just busy working on all sorts of other stuff. Obviously, there's going to be another, I don't know if it's just going to be a trilogy, but definitely a third book in the Seven Forges Blasted Lands trilogy, because there is definitely going to be a war. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, from these first 2 books, it seems like the Sabbat Talor just are unbeatable as a people. In the first book, I think 10 of them, wiped out like 1,000 people in a very short amount of time. So those are not good odds for the people of Feline, so we'll have to see exactly what happens. And I'm looking forward to it. I don't know when the next one is coming out, so I'm waiting with bated breath. I think I covered everything I want to cover. I really should take notes and write these things down. Let's see if you can see the little tiny picture of the cover of the first book. So, there you have it. The Blasted Lands by James A. Moore. Highly recommended. If you haven't read Seven Forges, pick that up. Read it. pick this up and read it. Pick them both up at the same time and read them both. And then you can be like me and wait and wait and wait for the next book. So hopefully the wait won't be too long. So yeah, if it's good fantasy. As I said before in the review for Seven Forges, it sort of falls in between that really heavy Lord of the Rings type fantasy and the pulpy Conan the Barbarian type fantasy. I lean towards the Conan the Barbarian stuff. This kind of falls in the middle of those two extremes, I would say. So it's a really nice, I was going to say nice middle of the road book, but that kind of makes it sound like it's meh. But it's definitely not. It's not a middle of the road book. It just sort of falls in the middle of those two, Lord of the Rings and Conan the Barbarian. I'm going to admit it. I'm not a big fan of Lord of the Rings. But that's just me. So, The Blasted Lands. As always, please put any comments, questions, or corrections in the comments down below. If you know how to pronounce any of these names, and you can spell it out phonetically or whatever, put those down in the comments below as well, please. And as always, I will put a link to where you can find this book in the description down below, along with the link to the video for Seven Forges review. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thanks to everybody who watches these videos. I'm just going to keep them coming. Trying to promote not just the things that I like, but reading in general. Way back when I posted my very first video, I said I was going to do some things other than books, and I've done that 3 times, I think. Everything else has been books, so I may throw another game or movie review in somewhere. Yeah, I think there's a few things, kind of obscure things, that I'd like to bring to people's attention. But anyway, that's it for this episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I threw my little sign. It was on the floor. So that's it. I'm Eric Smith, and until next time, read more books.